You know what's really lame? Your boy still has this freaking cold. But you know what isn't lame? The new Ben Burgess album, so let's talk about it. So if you're unfamiliar with who Ben Burgess is, he is best known as a songwriter for Big Loud. He's good buddies with and a frequent writer for guys like Ernest, Hardy, and Morgan Wallen. He's one of those names that you may not recognize instantly, but he's behind some of the biggest songs of the last few years, whether that be Signed Sober You, Flower Shops, or his biggest hit, Whiskey Glasses.
Don't think about her.
But similar to Ernest, Ben had a pretty indirect route that led him to where he is today as an accomplished songwriter in mainstream country music. Born and raised in Dallas, Texas, he's talked about being a professional furniture mover before his friend invited him to a studio to record some of his demos, which led to him moving out to LA to try and make it as a songwriter. And although it sounds like his time in LA was pretty up and down, he managed to build a decently impressive resume, writing cuts for people like the Jonas Brothers, Lil Wayne, and his most successful song, There For You, which was performed by Martin Garrix and Troye Sivan, which currently has nearly 350 million views on YouTube. But eventually he made the move over to Nashville, writing for Big Loud Records, and has been pretty instrumental in their success, with Big Loud becoming one of the most influential labels in country music today. But again, similar to Ernest, Ben has recently decided to step out of the songwriting shadows and begin performing and recording his own songs. And just this past Friday, Ben released his debut album, Tears the Size of Texas, and honestly, I think it's pretty darn interesting. This album is very to the point. At 10 songs for a runtime of 38 minutes, this album really packs a solid punch and then gets on its way. The cover of the album describes itself as classic cowboy songs, and while that's what these tracks may be at heart, he really effectively translates that into a modern context, and I think that's what might make it land with fans today. He's not making cowboy music like Charlie Crockett, who sounds like a remaster of an obscure Western soundtrack. What Ben brings is classic cowboy sentiments, aesthetics, and attitudes, but it's being presented through that signature Big Loud sound with some crisp mastering and rockin' energy. I mean, I know he works really close with them, but the artistic similarities between Ben and someone like Morgan or Hardy are most plainly there, but what makes Ben stand out is the fact that he's not trying to present himself as this good old boy. He's this mysterious cowboy who is willing to kill and die for what he believes. Although some parts, like the killing, are definitely exaggerated for dramatic effect, it's hard to say how much of this persona is authentic to Ben as a person. I mean, he's the kind of guy to show up to an interview wearing a fringe jacket, but then he'll dap you up and refer to you as dog for the next 20 minutes. Because of that, I think he does open the door to some criticism, just like how initially some people weren't necessarily on board with Midland because they were posing as these sleazy Western playboys, when in reality they were all married, one was an underwear model, and one directed music videos for Bruno Mars. Some people didn't like that they hadn't lived the life of the people they were trying to present themselves as. They didn't like the inauthenticity, but I myself, I don't really care. I'm more than willing to suspend my disbelief if the music is really good. And although I understand and respect people who exclusively crave authenticity in their music consumption, I do think it is a bit of a dumb criticism. Unless you're a child, nobody's ever walked away from a superhero movie and hated it because Tom Holland isn't actually Spider-Man. You're not sitting there during the movie saying like, you know, man, I just can't get on board because you know he's not slinging these webs in real life. I think as long as the presentation and product are in line with each other, why can't somebody dress up as a Western character if they're going to make really good music under that name? And look how it panned out. It's hard to argue acts like Midland weren't a net positive for mainstream country music over these last several years. They were one of the most unapologetic bands when it came to pushing traditional sounds into the mainstream. And look at the state of country music now compared to what it was in 2017. This has become a bit of a side rant on its own. My point is, whether or not Ben is actually pulling up to the grocery store on a horse with pearl snaps loaded with a big iron, that doesn't change my view of the music, because the music itself, like I said, for the most part, is pretty darn impressive. Overall, I definitely prefer the front half of the album to the backside, although I think the two closing tracks are some of the best he has to offer. The album opens with the title track, Tears the Size of Texas, a song I've talked about on the channel before. I think it's a really well-paced murder ballad with an interesting inner conflict of Ben pleading for Daisy to not fall in love with him, because he knows how wild his West is. He knows he's not worthy of her trust. Regardless, she trusts him anyways, and despite Ben not wanting to, he winds up giving in and cheating on Daisy, but he gets caught and shot. Good old Daisy made him pay, which, you know, maybe isn't fair. Like, surely this was outlined pretty clearly in the terms and conditions of this relationship. Like, up until that final chorus, Ben was practically pleading with Daisy to not involve herself with him because he would cheat. But then as soon as he went out and cheated, she killed him. I think Ben was just being a man of his word. Justice for Ben, man. But regardless, the song is a beautiful opener that also introduces you to Ben's character very well. In the last chorus, Ben really shows this inner conflict going on inside of him. He knows he's going to do the wrong thing even though he wants to do what's right. It's just the nature of who he is. It's pretty much a cowboy interpretation of Paul's verse in Romans when he says, I do not understand what I do, for what I want to do I do not do, but what I hate I do. That pretty much encapsulates Ben's cowboy character. These themes of inner conflict, almost like a two-face, can be found all over this album. White Picket Fence is another compelling story similar to Tears the Size of Texas, with Ben warning this girl to not settle down on this relationship because it isn't actually healthy. Even though she wants to settle down, it's only because they've come this far. The relationship itself isn't going to last. So Ben says, let's get out while we still have a chance, before our first kiss and our first dance, and a white picket fence. The song frequently references a deck of cards, which I think is A, unique, and for that reason I think it stands out, but also B, very well aligned with Ben's character, given he is a gambling cowboy, even referencing Vegas on the 6th track, Heartbreak.
There wouldn't be no Vegas.
He opens the song saying, you're the queen of hearts, I'm just a joker with a diamond, you were hoping for a full house, I guess that I was just lying to myself. And then he goes on to say how the queen deserves a king, but that king isn't him, and there's nothing either of them can do to change that. So don't build a white picket fence around a house of cards, because as soon as the wind blows, the whole thing is going to fall apart. Overall, I think this album finds the most success when it is leaning the most into the Western imagery and cowboy persona, which continues on the haunting 3rd track, When We Die. It's an emotional moment with Ben being down to his last straw, asking generally, should he be afraid of death? Or should he just go out recklessly, and if he dies, because there's a gang of pain outside his door, and he's all out of bullets. He personifies the pain into rival members to say he has nothing to counter them. It's the kind of pain a cowboy can't survive, but before he steps out the door, before he throws his life away, he needs to know where he goes when he dies. And if it's heaven, he's going to go to the bar right now and buy the boys one more round before he goes off and dies. To me, it doesn't read like he's going to kill himself or anything like that. It more sounds like he's just going to drop his guard. He's not going to prioritize his safety. And in this imaginary Western world he creates on this album, with death being such a frequent occurrence or threat, especially in this song when he talks about going down south for a light, he's more just letting himself go, and if he gets killed, he gets killed. Because he portrays himself as a pretty wanted man across this album. I imagine it like the scene from The Outsiders when Dally goes on a little crime spree and then winds up getting mowed down by the cops. I think that's the kind of trajectory Ben's character is hinting at here. I also want to mention the build of this track. I think it's arranged in a really satisfying way. He does make you wait a bit for the chorus, but when it does hit, the rhythm picks up, the energy picks up, and you can hear how fed up Ben is just through his vocals alone.
'Cause I'm going to the bar right now.
Especially in that last chorus, Ben really pushes himself vocally and hits some darn impressive notes that had me in my car like, whoa. He actually went for it, showing off his impressive range that he keeps pretty secret other than a few moments. He's not belting or trying to flaunt his voice on every song, so when he does, it really does hit you. The 4th track, Jackson, is the second of the 2 murder ballads advertised on the cover. It's a dramatic, string-driven powerhouse of a song about Ben warning this privileged, upper-class rich kid to keep himself and his fancy material possessions away from his girl. He's seen this guy Jackson lurking around Ben's side of town, and it's no secret what he's there for. Ben says you can take anything you want from this side of town. You can take my dad's old guitar, you can take his bar, just don't take Ben's girl. In a way, that also really reminds me of The Outsiders with the divide between the Socs and the Greasers. I just love the way Ben describes this dude Jackson and how he mocks his privileged upbringing. Jackson, you were born on Easy Street, golden slippers on your feet, ain't you lucky? Jackson, you could rob a bank with that smile. Heart thieving is your style. But Ben warns him to keep his money and mansion and good looks away from Ben's girl, cause as Ben says in the bridge, he's got a big iron in the glove box, and if the choice is losing his girl or doing time in prison, Ben knows which one he would choose. So I guess it never confirms Ben does kill Jackson, but I think it's the only other song here that makes sense despite one of the tracks literally being called Kill a Man. Heartbreak I've spoke about on the channel before. I think it's got a super infectious hook, a great drive, and a really clever gist. Ben trying trying to make this girl feel better about their breakup by explaining how heartbreak makes the world go around, and even though it may hurt for them, just think of the local bars and casinos they're supporting through the collapse of their relationship. Great song. Killer Man is an interesting one. I'm not as big on the way the verses sound on this track. I think the melody is a bit flatter, and generally the rhythm just feels more like a Kane Brown pop song, especially with the oohs in the pre-chorus. But then as soon as the chorus hits, it's like this exhale of like, okay, we're back to that awesome Western sound.
'Cause baby, I'm sorry.
But the lyrics I actually find really interesting. It's Ben saying to this girl that he knows she's been out with other guys. He knows she hasn't been loyal, but he doesn't want to talk about it. For his own comfort, he'd rather not talk about it and act like it isn't true, even though multiple sources can confirm otherwise. In that way, it reminded me of one of my favorite Giveon songs, Lie Again, which is Giveon telling this girl to lie right to his face and act like he's the only guy she's been seeing, even though he knows she's been getting around. But here Ben puts his cowboy spin on it by saying, don't tell me his name because I don't want to kill a man. Because knowing himself, if he finds out who the guy is, he's gonna have to get rid of him. I guess you can't lose the competition that doesn't exist. High Road and Sick and Tired are definitely my least favorites on the record here. I just don't think they bring anything interesting, especially when held up against the other cowboy ballads. Especially Sick and Tired, it just says surprisingly little despite being 4.5 minutes long, even though the last like 40 seconds is just some dragged out reverb. But then the album really goes out with a bang. Started a Band is this awesome revenge rock banger. Ben talking about how he went to a concert with his girl a few years ago, but she was in love with the lead singer more than him. He took their picture backstage and he left in his truck, but she left in the band's van. So he went home, got a guitar, and started a band. What makes this song so funny and smart is the subtle word changes in the chorus as the song progresses. It starts with them going to this concert with a crowd of 500 people, holding up $10 beers, singing the words. Then, when Ben starts his own band, he's singing to a crowd of 15 people, holding up $2 beers, singing all the words wrong. But it ends with Ben name-dropping his buddy Morgan Wallen, saying now he's opening for Morgan to a crowd of 100,000 people, holding up $20 beers, singing all of his words back to him. And the catch is that the girl who left him before has come crawling back and she wants to get back with Ben, but he just takes a picture with her backstage, acting all superstar like he doesn't even know who she is. And he looks back saying he may have lost the girl, but he started a band. It's funny, it's satisfying, it's a slow burn over 5 minutes long, but it just gets better and better and better the further you get. But I do wonder, since he name-dropped Morgan, if this is actually about a true story. Like, I wonder if this actually happened. And then the album closes off with the short but gorgeous Ain't Got No Phone, which is a very short song, just over 2 minutes long, with Ben outlining two scenarios. Himself being down and depressed, realizing how unfair life is, and his buddy Jerry recognizes that and tells him he needs to talk to someone, but there's only one man Ben wants to talk to, but heaven doesn't have a phone. Initially I read this as God being the only man Ben wants to talk to, but the second verse makes me wonder, because the second verse is all about his mom being unable to sleep and just smoking away her days in the garage ever since her husband passed away, and there's only one man she wants to talk to, but again, heaven doesn't have a phone. Ben's verse still very well could be alluding to God, but I also wonder if the whole song is centered around his father, with Ben's father being the only one him and his mom want to talk to. Regardless, musically it absolutely sparkles. That guitar line is probably the prettiest moment on the entire album. It has this muffled kick drum running throughout in the back that I actually don't mind as a means of keeping pace. The only thing I don't like is that riser he adds before the first chorus. It just makes that part feel very synthetic, and especially since they don't include it for the second chorus, I just wonder what the point was in adding it for the first chorus. But nevertheless, still an absolutely beautiful way to end off a pretty darn impressive debut album. Looking at the time here, I went on for a bit longer than I anticipated to, especially since I know how YouTube works. A solo review of a smaller artist like this isn't going to perform overly well, but I just found myself too invested and interested in this Ben Burgess album. I couldn't not talk about it without going this in depth. I think it's a fascinating release from someone on a label like Big Loud, and I'm intrigued to see how it's received by fans. I'm wondering how it will perform numerically, will it take off or will it tank, and I wonder how the performance will impact Ben's approach musically moving forward. I hope it works for him because, like I've said over the last however many minutes, I think it's a release that deserves to be talked about, and it's part of this trend I've been noticing. Maybe trend isn't the right word, but it just really seems like cowboys are having a moment right now in country music. Not that they ever went away, but there seems to be more buzz around cowboys than there has been in a while. I mean, you've got people like Charlie Crockett really coming into stride. His brand seems to be really landing with the fans right now. You've got rodeo folks like Cody Johnson, who's been killing it in the mainstream ever since he moved to Nashville. You've got mountain cowboys like Ian Munsick, who has been a pretty hot topic lately. And now you've got newcomers like Ben Burgess from these massive labels coming out with a cowboy album filled with murder ballads and big irons. It just seems like cowboys are selling right now, and I love that. But not just a cowboy like a dude that pulls up to a bar in a cowboy hat, but a dude who's gonna ride on a horse and shoot you if you try to steal his girl. That's the kind of cowboy we're talking about here. But enough of that, I need to wrap up this video. Rating wise, I'd probably give this album a 7.5 out of 10, only because when you have a tighter track list like this one, those two misses I think wind up claiming more stock than they would on a longer record. I'm not saying this album needed to be longer, I think it's the perfect length. I just think those two songs didn't bring much to compete with the rest on this album. Anyways, that's all I've got for you guys today. If you enjoyed, a like really does help my channel out. If you're new, maybe consider subscribing for more country music content. In the description, you can find links to my Instagram, Discord, podcast, and Patreon if you'd like to support me on any of those. And yeah, other than that, I hope you guys have a great day.